There was something about losing myself in a good memoir that I find hugely appealing. The book that I found this time was titled I Did It My Ways by Dan Forrest with Stephen Clarke. Deanna describes herself as an 86-year-old stand-up comedian who was previously a singer and an American in Paris who lived a scandalous life that was a far cry from the conventional expectations of her Jewish family in Boston in the United States. She was born in 1934. As a writer, I have spent so much of my time under a rock that I have not even heard of Dan Forrest. Still desperate to get away from my own life, at least temporarily, I began turning the pages. Memoir as a form draws me in because I am interested in learning how people construct their lives and live on their own terms, especially against the backdrop of conventionality. It's possible that conventional people don't write memoirs, or maybe it is I have never been interested in reading such a memoir. By definition, a memoirist has a story to tell. And if the story is just like everyone else's, then why bother? I Did It My Ways is an interesting story of a woman who lived and continues to live an unconventional life and held my interest. And I may have a very different unconventional life myself, but there at the heart of the memoir is a story that dovetails with my own. Dan Forrest had to struggle to find herself, and she has always dealt with the feeling of difference. I have long struggled with feeling different also. In my case and Dan's over the years, this has lessened. As Dan writes, maybe she just didn't care anymore. When she was growing up, the United States was rife with anti-Semitism, and many of her ancestors in Europe had lived in Latvia and were killed in the Nazi-run concentration camps. Later in life, she becomes obsessed with going to visit the concentration camps in Europe. As she writes, my never-ending fight to avoid getting judged for who my ancestors were made me even more determined to go to Europe and face the truth about what real hatred can do. Of her trip to Leningrad, she writes, it was a hard lesson. Silence, I realized, can kill almost as much as violence. When we keep our eyes and mouths shut in the face of prejudice, we're collaborating in that prejudice. Her issue of not fitting in began in childhood when she was a self-described tomboy, but she wanted to fit in, and that meant dating boys. But fortunately, the boys didn't go for it, so Dan ended up going to college. She attended college in New England at a time when sororities didn't let Jews in. Wanting to fit in somewhere, Dan ended up joining a Presbyterian choir. Her mother told her that was fine, but to hum whenever they mentioned Jesus. In college, Dan studied French and spent a year abroad in France, which ended up changing her life. She experienced less anti-Semitism in France and observed the kids there who she encountered didn't ask her who her grandparents were or what religion she was. Throughout her life, Dan observed that she felt freer to be herself in Paris. Dan spent her life as bisexual which probably made it easier to bend to her parents' demands of conventionality, and she did marry a man, which lasted a relatively short time. Dan went back to Paris after the marriage ended and pursued an active sex life with both men and women. She became a singer in Paris and later reinvented herself as a stand-up comic. I found I Did It My Ways, a memoir by Dan Forrest with Stephen Clarke, to be an inspiring page-turner of a good read. This is Jan Mason with reviews for BookTube.